This is Taiwan, also known as the Republic of China. In some areas, just 1.2 miles of ocean separate Taiwan from their behemoth of a neighbor, the People's Republic of China. Now, looking at the screen, you may be confused. How can they both officially be a Republic of China? This is where the motive for this entire invasion comes into play. See, there aren't really two Chinas. Kinda. It's confusing. So here's a quick rundown. In the beginning, there was basically no tension between their two territories. But that was before colonialism came into play, as always. When Taiwan was, quote, discovered by Portuguese sailors in the 1500s, the islands were home to an indigenous population. And sometime later, when the Netherlands' infamous Dutch East India Company established a base in southwestern Taiwan in 1626, it employed Chinese laborers to work alongside the people already living there to work on the company's rice and sugar plantations. In 1885, Taiwan was declared a province of the Qing Empire after the Chinese military freed the island from European colonialists, a province under a Chinese empire. The Chinese laborers left on the island coexisted alongside the indigenous Taiwanese that had been there from the start. Chinese presence on the island increased until eventually Mandarin would become the official language of the island. And so we have the first piece of history that supports China's belief that Taiwan is a part of it. Eventually, after losing the First Sino-Japanese War in 1895, the Qing dynasty came under control of the Japanese Empire until their defeat in World War II. While under their control, in 1911, a group of revolutionaries in southern China led a successful revolt against the Qing dynasty, establishing in its place the Republic of China, which included Taiwan as well. Then came the Chinese Civil War from 1927 to 1949 between the Chinese Nationalist Party-led government of the Republic of China and the Communist Party of China, or the CPC for short. As we obviously know, the CPC under Mao Zedong won control of the now independent Republic of China, declared it the People's Republic of China, and the some 2 million officers and troops of the Nationalist Party, along with many civilians and refugees, retreated from mainland China to the island of Taiwan. Initially, this was supposed to be just temporary in order to regroup, fortify, and reconquer the mainland. But once the realization hit that there's no way to win, they officially became the Republic of China, focused on modernization and development of the island, and now see themselves as distinct from mainland China, with its own constitution and democratically elected leaders. But the thing is, mainland China, or the People's Republic of China, still believes Taiwan is a part of their territory, due to the history of them being together mentioned above. The Chinese Communist Party even has a name for this: the One China Principle, the position that there is only one sovereign state under the name China, with the PRC serving as the sole legitimate government of that China, and Taiwan an inalienable part of them. The People's Republic of China even passed a law in 2005 that declared reunifying the motherland as the sacred duty of all Chinese people, including through the use of non-peaceful means if necessary. So that brings us to the present day. China's President Xi Jinping said that reunification with Taiwan must and will be fulfilled, and has not ruled out the possible use of force to achieve this. This is where things get interesting, because China is currently without a doubt the second most powerful country on Earth. On paper and easily, they can take Taiwan on a one-on-one. But like I said, they're the second most powerful country on Earth, stronger than everyone except America. And America won't let Taiwan fall that easily. Now, the US's role in all this is a bit vague, but that's exactly how they want it. Their stance on this matter is the One China policy, which acknowledges that there is only one China on either side of the Taiwan Strait, and that Taiwan is a part of China, and does not challenge that position. However, at the same time, they've had unofficial relations with Taiwan since 1979, and have said, whether it be through George W. Bush in 2001, or Joe Biden in 2022, that the US would intervene militarily if China invaded Taiwan. But whenever this happens, White House officials are quick to reaffirm that there has been no policy shift from the One China policy. This type of strategy is known as strategic ambiguity, where the cryptic wording of the message intends to discourage both a declaration of independence by Taiwan and an invasion from China. It's worked quite well so far. But would the US actually help Taiwan if China invaded them? Well, first, we need to understand why Taiwan is so important to the US. America prides itself on being the most powerful country on Earth, and they spend almost $1 trillion a year on its military and R&D to maintain this. So dominance is extremely important to them. Meanwhile, like I said before, China is number 2 in the world, so it's a direct threat to the US's geopolitical dominance. The two countries are having influence battles all over the world, from Latin America to Africa to Europe, with the Asia-Pacific region being the most complex, and Taiwan being located in this region and literally right next to China, makes it an absolute treasure for the US in terms of strategic positioning. It can serve as a base for US military operations and intelligence gathering, contributing to regional security and the protection of US interests. China gaining control of Taiwan would threaten US naval bases in Guam and Japan, and allow China to control important trade routes between Southeast Asia and Japan. Not only that, but Taiwan's economy is extremely important too. Much of the world's everyday electronic equipment, such as phones and laptops, is powered by computer chips made in Taiwan, including Apple. A single Taiwanese company, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, produces over 60% of the world's semiconductors, and over 90% of the world's most advanced ones. So not only for America, but for the rest of its Western allies, Taiwan simply cannot fall, nor can they fall into China's hands. They're simply too important for global supply chains. Now again, what exactly happens if China invades Taiwan? A superpower that believes unification is literal destiny, matched against another superpower that literally cannot under any circumstances let the island be unified with the mainland, has all the ingredients for World War III. It's common knowledge that Taiwan is severely outmatched by the strength of the Chinese military. Just look at this graph showing a comparison of them. And China makes sure to remind the Taiwanese of this by flying aircrafts through their airspace without identifying themselves. The coast of Taiwan is now littered with more Chinese Navy ships than ever before. Taiwan's best chance for survival against a Chinese invasion is through the porcupine strategy, according to US government officials. Basically, make the small island of Taiwan bristle with anti-ship missiles, anti-tank munitions, and air defense weapons, enabling a prolonged campaign of survival and attrition. Like a porcupine, this strategy enables the smaller party to have the potential to inflict enough damage that it deters actions of the larger aggressor. We've seen this approach be validated by lessons learned from Russia's war on Ukraine, where Ukraine has held off Russia using foreign-supplied mobile weapons. And we know that the West has shown itself to be extremely willing to write a blank check to one of their nations fighting an aggressor. These capabilities would seriously degrade a Chinese invasion, but more importantly, it would buy Washington time to intervene before Beijing completes and consolidates its conquest. If America has enough time to replenish its forces and bases there, then it's truly going to be a close battle. While it's impossible to know for certain how China would attack Taiwan, there's really only one way: a sea invasion. It's the most plausible way of moving tons of soldiers onto the mainland. How it could look is China beginning a massive, multi-month-long amphibious force build up along the coastal cities closer to Taiwan. This is detected by US and Taiwanese intelligence, and they begin force preservation countermeasures. Politicians and military leaders would be put under protective custody. Their assets would be moved into underground bunkers, and they deploy decoys to confuse any recon efforts. Reserves would be called up too, and the US would probably be delivering a massive amount of weapons to Taiwan in this build-up period. At this point, the clock is ticking for China. Its invasion fleet and docks would be mostly in range of Taiwanese anti-ship cruise missiles. Remember too that Taiwan is more than just one island, but rather 168 of them, so the strategy from here can be going straight to the mainland or jump from island to island. One of these islands is the island of Kinmen, just 1.2 miles away from China. It's more of a tourist destination than anything else right now, yet it contains an underground network from when it was used as a base in World War II, making it an ideal base for the Chinese to plan further attacks on Taiwan from. It's unlikely Taiwan would expend a large amount of forces defending Kinmen because it's so deep in enemy territory. This is where the first invasion may start, with whatever cyber warfare they have ready being deployed at this point to create a shock and awe effect, along with sabotage effects from any sleeper agents they may have on the ground in Taiwan during the build-up period. Once China eventually captures Kinmen, using it as a base to the mainland could be the priority. China would likely pick out critical infrastructure for an initial assault, like power plants, refineries, airfields, surface-to-air batteries, military bases, etc. My guess would be doing this through submarines that launch cruise missiles, but that's just me. From Taiwan's perspective, the initial barrage of missiles is likely to be terrifying, but ultimately ineffective. Some air bases will be knocked offline for a few hours, but the Patriot missiles and point defense systems will do a decent job protecting their above-ground static objects, while decoys and misinformation will lead many missiles to hit worthless targets. Their most important assets will be mobile or underground too. Now, the entire possibility of success of this Chinese invasion is based on their ability to establish a beachhead in Taiwan. If they can do that, the island may be lost. But that's extremely hard to do. if not impossible, against the country who's basically stockpiling every form of defense possible. Amphibious invasions are extremely complex and difficult. Ships are slow, large, and very expensive, while the things that kill them are fast, small, and relatively cheap. So if I'm China, my priority is achieving air and naval superiority over the strait and eventually Taiwan, because without that, an amphibious invasion is for sure not working. Most landing boats for an invasion force basically need to go directly to the beaches, which makes them easy to find, and easy to hit too, since they need to sit still for a while to unload. China needs to have its aircrafts patrol over the island and suppress these threats. Otherwise, these men are as good as dead. In any case, they'd be facing a multitude of sea mines, torpedoes below the water, landmines on the beach, and drone strikes everywhere in between. From here, after the bombardment, the Chinese Navy then encircles the main island of Formosa, as tens of thousands of soldiers cross the Taiwan Strait in a mix of military amphibious craft and airborne troops landing behind beachheads. From there, they'll have to deal with a sizable population that, similar to Ukraine, is willing to die for their country. Remember that when you're on the defensive side, the morale and patriotism for fighting is always much stronger. While the west side of the island is heavily fortified, the east is shielded by the central mountain range, making it extremely hard for the Chinese army to attack the entrenchment Taiwan would have. And when you add in America throwing its military weight behind the defense of Taiwan, assuming enough time is bought for them to come to their aid, then China's success is next to impossible. And that's the thing, the conquering of Taiwan needs to be quick, or else there's really a 0% chance for success. That's part of the reason why Russia was so successful in annexing Crimea in 2014, because they just showed up, caught the world off guard, and executed their takeover swiftly with minimal resistance. The problem is that Taiwan is heavily armed. They wouldn't be able to shell Taiwan for weeks ahead of time to take out air and anti-ship defenses, so they would suffer massive losses. I mean, it doesn't really matter how big your army is if you only have 1,000 ships and you're trying to invade an island with 10,000 anti-ship missiles. Now, while the bombardment, encirclement, and ground invasion of Taiwan is the most probable pipeline for directly taking over the country, another option would be a blockade, and this could actually be done alongside the invasion, beforehand. Make no mistake though, conducting a blockade, even without firing a single shot, is still an act of war under international law. How it could happen is that after a series of increasingly provocative military exercises, which the Chinese Navy already does all the time, the Chinese Navy would move from that position into cutting off shipping lanes in and out of Taiwan. This would obviously be under false pretenses, similar to the way Russia made excuses for invading Ukraine. But it's the most plausible way. The problem is though, you can't just say you're going to blockade a country. You must also enforce it. The waters around Taiwan are one of the busiest areas for maritime traffic. A lot of ships, not just those bound for Taiwan, traverse the straits. This means you can't just shoot at any ship in the area. You must patrol, intercept, board, and potentially seize merchant ships. A logistically challenging undertaking even if China had complete naval dominance in the area. The chances of a misunderstanding with a Japanese or Korean ship can easily spiral out of control, not to mention American ships. The right of American merchants to go anywhere and sell anything around the world has always been policy and worth fighting for the Americans. So what happens when they try to escort supplies to Taiwan? A blockade is useless if an ally of the enemy can still supply it. So they'd be forced to attack the US. Anything could happen from that point. What we do know though is that the entire world would no doubt be enraged at China. Regardless of what happens, even without firing a single shot, shipping rates and insurance will cost a lot more due to having to travel through a war zone, hurting the economies of its neighbors. And do you really want to piss off Japan, who's now heavily increasing their defense spending by 60% in the coming years? Or South Korea, who are quickly becoming one of the world's biggest arms suppliers? There's no ways they'd both sit back and let China passively blockade the strait. But the thing is, China would still have quite some leverage. The same sanctions that the US, EU, NATO, and others put on Russia would not work for China. The entire world is far more reliant on Chinese industry than Russia, and it's not even close. Placing significant restrictions would hurt the rest of the world as much as China. If they can somehow do a successful blockade of Taiwan, it would be detrimental. Taiwan is only 33% self-sufficient in food, but even more concerning, they import 98% of its energy, highlighting a major weakness. It's unlikely the US would do nothing though. And more so, China needs to take Taiwan in a quick victory, and a blockade is not going to do that. What Taiwan also has going for it is if it continues to stockpile so many missiles, then that could be a potential deterrent to stop China from attacking, or else they'd fire at and destroy their country too. On the other hand though, doing this would lose Taiwan's sympathy. If they are purely defensive and China isn't able to pull off an effective invasion, it places immense external and internal pressure on the CCP. If China is able to claim damages from Taiwanese strikes, then they can spin the story for their domestic audience and boost morale. What's for certain is this is an extremely complex, expensive war, one that's projected to destroy more than $2.6 trillion worth of world trade. That's 3% of the world's GDP. China has no doubt learned from and taken note of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, what went wrong, the world's response, and everything else you can imagine. So there's no doubt if their time to invade Taiwan ever comes, it will be a lot more calculated. As for when this will be, US intelligence believes that Xi Jinping has ordered his military to be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027. And that's when they'll have all the ships they'd need for the invasion. In the meantime, with every passing year, China relatively gains on the US in economic and military strength, bridging the gap between them ever closer and making the war more and more balanced. But the last time China ever engaged in a real armed conflict was back in 1979, during the Sino-Vietnamese War, and that wasn't a resounding success to say the least. Since then, it's all been drills and exercises, so who knows how they'd actually perform on the battlefield, and if it ever comes down to nukes, then we're all dead. With that, thank you for watching.